man trusted with secrets the world would never know.
Move it, Hale, let's go!
Then one night, he came back from a mission covered in blood, and the system
Keep your head
erased
down.
him. They called him a traitor, a criminal, a ghost that deserved to disappear. Even his own memories betrayed him, leaving only silence and scars. But there was one witness who never forgot the truth. Not a human.
Understand me, boy.
Not a camera.
It's up to you now.
A
You're my
dog.
only hope.
Where are you watching from? And what do you feel after this story? Like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 subs so we can keep telling stories like this. The helicopter touched down without ceremony, its blades still slicing the cold northern air as if the sky itself refused to let go of him. Lucas Hale staggered onto the concrete runway, boots heavy with snow and blood. Not all of it was his. He wasn't sure whose most of it was anymore. He was 37 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence once made rooms feel safer just by standing in them. His hair, once kept in strict military precision, now hung messily across his forehead, damp with sweat and melted ice. A short beard covered his jaw, darker than it used to be, as if time had aged him years in a single night. His eyes, steel gray, usually sharp and alert, looked distant now, unfocused, like someone had turned the world into static. Two soldiers rushed toward him. "Lieutenant Hale, are you injured?" Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat felt full of smoke and metal. His body swayed. The last thing he remembered clearly was the forest, snow falling too quietly. Coda's silhouette ahead of him, ears up, a shadow between the trees. Then pain. Not the kind that screams, the kind that disconnects. Hands grabbed Lucas before he hit the ground. Medical personnel shouted orders. Someone pressed a blanket over his shoulders. Another voice spoke into a radio. And then, handcuffs. Cold steel around his wrists. Lucas blinked, confusion slicing through the fog. "What?" His voice cracked. "What are you doing?" No one answered. Instead, a man in a dark civilian coat stepped forward. He was in his late 40s, clean-shaven with sharp cheekbones and eyes that never softened. His posture was relaxed, but there was something surgical about the way he observed Lucas, like a doctor studying a body on a table. "Lucas Hale," the man said calmly, "you are under arrest." Lucas stared at him. For what? The man didn't raise his voice, didn't hesitate. High treason, illegal arms trafficking, and the murder of a civilian intelligence officer. The world tilted. Lucas laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because it made no sense. "That's impossible," he said hoarsely. "You've got the wrong man." The man in the coat looked at him for a long second, then gestured to the soldiers. "Take him." By morning, Lucas Hale no longer existed. At least, not as a person. He became a headline. The media devoured him. They replayed old footage of Lucas receiving medals, standing tall in uniform, Coda at his side, then cut to new images of him in handcuffs, blood on his sleeves, face hollow and unrecognizable. The contrast was irresistible. A hero who snapped, a guardian who betrayed his country, a soldier who sold secrets and killed his own. The nickname spread like wildfire, the fallen ghost. Because to the public, he had become something worse than a criminal. He had become a disappointment. The interrogation room was small, white, and too bright. Lucas sat alone at the metal table, wrists chained to a steel ring. His head throbbed. His left shoulder burned in a deep, dull way that made him nauseous. Across from him sat Daniel Crow, the federal prosecutor assigned to the case. Crow was tall, lean, with perfectly pressed hair and a suit that looked too expensive for a room like this. His skin was pale, his expression calm in the way only men who never lose are calm. He smiled politely. "Lieutenant Hale, or should I say, former lieutenant." Lucas didn't respond. Crow slid a tablet across the table. "Your GPS matches the weapons drop site. Your fingerprints are on the shipment crates. And your service weapon was used to kill Agent Miles Porter." Crow tapped the screen again. "3 charges, all verified, all documented." Lucas stared at the screen. It felt like watching someone else's life. "That's not what happened," he said quietly. Crow raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Lucas swallowed. His memory was fractured, like broken glass floating in dark water. "I was on recon. Coda detected movement. There was someone else in the forest. I felt something hit me, here." He touched his shoulder. "After that, everything goes blank." Crow leaned back in his chair. "Convenient." Lucas looked up, anger flashing briefly through the fog. "You think I'd risk everything for money?" he snapped. "I've turned down more Black Ops deals than you've had birthdays." Crow smiled thinly. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Hale. Some just pretend they don't." Lucas shook his head. "You're missing something." Crow waited. Lucas spoke the only truth he trusted. "My dog would never follow a traitor." Crow blinked. "Your dog?" "Coda," Lucas said. "German Shepherd. Military K9. 5 years old. He's trained to detect threats, deception, hostile intent." Crow folded his hands. "And?" Lucas met his eyes. "If I betrayed my team, Coda would have turned on me first." Silence filled the room. Crow stared at him for a moment, then laughed softly. "That's your defense? A dog's feelings?" Lucas didn't laugh. He just whispered, "Where is he?" Crow's smile faded. "That's not relevant to this investigation." Lucas's chest tightened. "It's the only thing that is relevant." Crow stood. "We're done for today." As he left the room, Lucas shouted after him, "Bring him here! If I'm lying, you'll know." But the door had already closed. That night, Lucas lay alone in the holding cell. The walls were gray. The light flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a man was screaming in his sleep. Lucas stared at the ceiling. His mind replayed fragments. Snow, breath fogging the air, Coda's tail swaying slowly, a shadow stepping closer than it should have. And then, pain. Not like a gunshot, not like an explosion, more like being pierced. Lucas pressed his fingers into his shoulder through the fabric. It hurt, but there was no memory of being stabbed, just the sensation, like a ghost wound. He closed his eyes, and that's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the prison, a low, distant bark. Lucas's heart skipped. "Coda?" he whispered. The bark came again. Soft, familiar, impossible. Lucas sat up, chains rattling. The corridor outside was empty, silent. But he knew that bark. He had heard it in jungles, in deserts, in burning buildings, in near-death moments. Coda only barked like that when something was wrong. Lucas pressed his forehead against the cold wall. Tears filled his eyes for the first time since the arrest. "Find me," he whispered into the darkness. "Please, find me." At exactly 2:17 a.m., the security cameras in North Ridge Federal Holding Facility recorded something strange. Corridor B, where Lucas Hale was being held, every dog in the K9 transport wing stood up at the same time. No alarms, no movement, no sound detectable to human ears. But every dog, trained, disciplined, silent, began staring at the same wall. The wall behind Lucas's cell. One handler later wrote in his report, "They weren't barking. They weren't aggressive. They were listening," as if something on the other side of the concrete was calling them. Lucas never saw that report. He only knew that for the first time since the helicopter landed, his chest felt different. Not lighter, but less empty. Somewhere, beyond the walls, beyond the lies, beyond the system that had already buried him, his dog was still searching. And as long as Coda was searching, Lucas Hale had not completely disappeared. North Ridge Federal Prison did not look like a place meant to hold human beings. It rose from the frozen forest like a concrete scar, its walls thick and colorless, blending almost seamlessly into the endless white of Minnesota's winter. Snow covered everything: watchtowers, fences, even the narrow road leading to the main gate, giving the illusion of peace. But beneath that silence lived something colder than the weather. Lucas Hale arrived in shackles. The transport van doors opened, and the cold hit him like a physical force. His breath turned into pale smoke as two guards pulled him down onto the icy ground. His wrists were chained in front of him, ankles locked together with heavy steel. He had worn combat gear in blizzards before. He had survived sub-zero nights in enemy territory. But this cold was different. This cold wasn't trying to kill his body. It was trying to erase him. Lucas looked up at the prison for a long moment. His tall frame seemed smaller now. His shoulders slightly curved forward, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. The beard on his face had grown uneven during the weeks of interrogation. His eyes, once alert and sharp, now carried a dull tension, like a man who was constantly bracing for impact. A guard behind him muttered, "Welcome to North Ridge, Ghost." Lucas didn't respond. He was still trying to understand how he had gone from elite Navy SEAL to federal inmate in less than 48 hours. The intake process was mechanical. Clothes taken, boots removed, dog tags confiscated. His uniform, once a symbol of honor, was placed into a clear plastic bag and labeled as evidence. They gave him a gray jumpsuit that smelled faintly of bleach and old sweat. The fabric felt wrong against his skin, too thin, too light, as if it offered no protection from anything at all. A short, broad-shouldered correctional officer led him down the main corridor. The officer's name badge read M. Keller. Keller had a shaved head, thick neck, and tired eyes. The kind of man who had seen too many broken people to be surprised by another one. He didn't look at Lucas with hatred or respect, just routine. "You'll be in solitary for now," Keller said. "Federal security protocol." Lucas nodded faintly. Solitary didn't scare him. Silence never had. What scared him was that the silence in his head was growing louder. The cell was small: concrete walls, metal bed, toilet in the corner, a narrow slit of reinforced glass near the ceiling. No windows, no clocks, no mirrors. Lucas sat on the bed and stared at his hands. They were still steady. No shaking, no visible fear. But something was wrong. His body felt familiar. His mind did not. It was like waking up in a house you'd lived in your whole life, only to realize the furniture had been moved while you slept. The shapes were there. The meaning was gone. That night, Lucas dreamed. He was running. Snow under his boots, breath burning his lungs. Coda ahead of him, tail high, ears sharp. Then, darkness between the trees. A sound behind him. Not footsteps, not breathing, just the sudden, violent certainty of danger. Lucas turned, and pain exploded in his back. Not a gunshot, not an explosion. A sharp, precise pressure, like being pierced by something narrow and cold. He tried to scream. No sound came out. Lucas woke up, gasping. His body jerked forward, chains rattling as his forehead hit the cold concrete wall. Sweat soaked through the prison jumpsuit. His heart was racing, his lungs burning as if he had actually been running. His left shoulder throbbed, a deep, internal pain. Lucas pressed his palm against it, confused. There was no wound, no blood, no memory. Just the pain, like a ghost injury. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe. This wasn't the first time. Every night since his arrest, the same dream, the same moment, always ending before he could see the face behind him. Always ending with pain and darkness. 3 days later, Lucas met Dr. Naomi Pierce. She was the prison's chief psychologist. Naomi Pierce was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with dark skin and short, tightly curled hair she kept tied back in a practical bun. Her eyes were warm but observant, the kind that missed nothing but judged very little. She dressed simply, neutral colors, no jewelry, no makeup, like someone who didn't want to be part of the story, only understand it. They sat across from each other in a small observation room. No chains this time, just a table and 2 chairs. "Lucas Hale," she said gently. "How are you feeling today?" Lucas almost laughed. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Naomi nodded. "That's not uncommon in cases like yours." "Cases like mine?" "Severe psychological trauma," she said. "You're showing clear signs of dissociation." Lucas frowned. "Meaning?" "Your mind has separated certain memories from conscious access. It's a defense mechanism." Lucas stared at the table. "So my brain is lying to me." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Or protecting you." Lucas shook his head. "From what?" Naomi hesitated. "That depends on what happened during your last mission." Lucas swallowed. "I don't remember." Naomi studied him carefully. "That's exactly the problem." Later that evening, a guard brought Lucas a thin medical file. "Sign here," the guard said. Lucas scanned the document. It was a military medical record, partially redacted. Most of the text was blacked out, but one line remained visible. "Emergency surgical intervention, upper thoracic region." Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He looked up. "I was operated on?" The guard shrugged. "Classified. That's all I know." Lucas touched his shoulder again. The pain suddenly made sense, and yet made everything worse. Because he had no memory of being stabbed, no memory of surgery, no memory of waking up afterward. Just blank space. Like someone had reached into his mind and cut something out. That night, Lucas dreamed again. But this time, something changed. He wasn't running. He was lying on the ground. Snow falling onto his face. Blood soaking into the fabric beneath him. And Coda was there. Not ahead of him, not searching, but standing over him, whining, pawing at his chest, trying to wake him up. Lucas reached out. "Coda." The dog lifted his head. Their eyes met, and for a brief second Lucas felt something powerful move through his body. Not fear, not pain, recognition. At 3:42 a.m., Lucas woke up suddenly. No nightmare, no screaming. Just a strange, overwhelming certainty. He sat up on his bed, heart pounding. And for the first time since arriving at North Ridge, he did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled, a small, confused smile, because deep in his chest, beneath the trauma, beneath the fear, beneath the erased memories, Lucas felt it, not as a thought, not as a voice, but as a presence. Coda was alive, and somehow, Coda was looking for him. The days that followed blurred together. Lucas attended therapy sessions with Dr. Pierce. They talked about memory, about identity, about what happens when the mind loses its timeline. "You were someone before this," Naomi said one afternoon. "And that person still exists, even if you can't access all of him." Lucas leaned back in the chair. "I used to know exactly who I was," he said quietly. "Now I'm not even sure I deserve to remember." Naomi studied him. "Why wouldn't you?" Lucas closed his eyes. "If I really did what they say I did, maybe forgetting is easier than knowing." Naomi's voice softened. "Or maybe the truth is the thing your mind is afraid to face." Lucas didn't answer. But that night, he dreamed again. This time, the dream didn't end in darkness. This time he saw the shadow, just a silhouette, standing behind him in the snow, close enough to touch, and in the silence, a voice whispered something he couldn't understand. But Coda barked, loud, urgent, as if trying to warn him. Lucas woke up with tears in his eyes. He didn't know why. He didn't know what the dream meant. But one thing became clear. Whatever happened in that forest, he had not been alone, and whatever his mind had erased, Coda had not. The decision came quietly, not with a headline, not with a press conference, not even with a warning, just a single line in a sealed federal document. Case, Hale versus United States, final sentence approved. Method, lethal injection. Date, pending. Daniel Crow read the file in his office as the morning light slid through the blinds. He sat alone behind his desk, coffee untouched, fingers resting lightly on the folder like a surgeon preparing for a final cut. Crow looked exactly as he always did. Tall, lean, hair neatly combed, suit perfectly pressed. But if someone had looked closely, they might have noticed the faint dark circles under his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. 5 years of appeals, internal reviews, military committees, classified reports that never reached the public, and still, no alternative explanation. Lucas Hale remained the only version of the truth the system had. Crow closed the folder and exhaled slowly. "Time to end this," he murmured. The notice arrived at North Ridge in the afternoon. Lucas was in the therapy room with Dr. Naomi Pierce when Officer Keller entered. Keller's expression was different this time. Less bored, less indifferent, more careful. "Hale," Keller said, "you've got official correspondence." Naomi looked up. "What kind of correspondence?" Keller hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "The final kind." Naomi's face tightened. Lucas didn't react at first. He simply took the envelope, fingers steady, and opened it. The words blurred. He read them anyway. Execution date, scheduled, final appeals denied. For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. Then he nodded. "Okay." Naomi leaned forward. "Lucas, it's fine," he interrupted gently. "I knew this was coming." Naomi searched his face, expecting fear, anger, collapse, but all she saw was exhaustion. The kind that comes after fighting a battle too long with no witnesses left. Keller cleared his throat. "You're allowed one final request, within reason." Lucas looked up. "One?" "Yes." Lucas didn't hesitate. "I want to see my dog." Keller blinked. "Your dog?" "Coda," Lucas said. "German Shepherd. Military K9. Naomi stiffened slightly. Keller frowned. "You don't want to speak to family? A lawyer?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't have either." Keller stared at him for a moment. "You're choosing a dog over a human goodbye." Lucas met his eyes. "I'm choosing the only being who ever knew me without a file." The request traveled through 3 departments. Prison administration rejected it. Military oversight delayed it. Federal execution protocol labeled it non-essential. It should have died there, but it didn't. Because the file landed on Sarah Whitman's desk. Sarah Whitman worked for Internal Affairs. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with pale, freckled skin and dark auburn hair usually tied into a low, messy ponytail. She dressed in practical clothes. Black boots, gray coats, no makeup, no jewelry except a small silver ring on her left thumb. Her eyes were sharp, almost unsettlingly so. The kind of eyes that didn't look for guilt. They looked for inconsistencies. Sarah had inherited the Hale case 2 years earlier after the original investigator resigned under medical stress. She had spent hundreds of hours reading sealed transcripts, GPS logs, and redacted military reports. Nothing fit. Lucas Hale was too clean, too controlled, too silent. Guilty men talked. They lied. They defended themselves. Lucas had done none of that. He had simply waited. When Sarah read the final request, she felt something tighten in her chest. A dog. Out of everything. She pulled up Lucas's original service profile. There they were, hundreds of photos. Lucas kneeling beside a German shepherd. Lucas running, through obstacle courses with him. Lucas sleeping on a cold floor with the dog's head on his chest. The name tag read, CODA, Tactical Tracking Unit. Sarah leaned back in her chair and whispered, "What if he's right?" The meeting with the prison board lasted 40 minutes. Most of it was resistance. This is not a therapy session. This is an execution protocol. We cannot bring an animal into a high-security chamber. Sarah remained calm. "You already lost 5 years ignoring human evidence," she said. "What's 10 minutes with a dog?" One administrator scoffed. "You think an animal is going to overturn a federal conviction?" Sarah didn't smile. "I think an animal might show us what humans refuse to look at." Silence. Then the warden spoke. "Under supervision, 10 minutes. The inmate restrained. The dog leashed at all times." Sarah nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Lucas was informed that evening. The guard who delivered the message seemed confused. "They approved it," Keller said. "Your dog is being transported." Lucas stared at him. For a second, his brain didn't process the words. "They... what?" 10-minute visit. Execution waiting room." Lucas sat down slowly on the edge of his bed. His chest tightened. Not with fear. With something far more dangerous. Hope. He pressed his palms together. "Thank you," he whispered. Keller looked away. Coda was 5 years old when the black military transport arrived at the kennel. He was larger than most German shepherds. His fur thick and dark around the back. Lighter along the chest and legs. His muzzle had begun to show hints of gray. Not from age, but from stress. He had stopped eating regularly. Stopped responding to basic commands. His new handler, a young officer named Evan Brooks, tried his best. But Coda was different now. Quiet. Alert. As if constantly waiting for something that never came. When they opened the crate, Coda stepped out slowly. He didn't bark, didn't resist the leash, but his ears twitched sharply as soon as the cold air hit his nose. He lifted his head and stared north. Toward North Ridge, Brooks frowned. "What is it, buddy?" Coda didn't move. Just stood there, breathing deeply, as if recognizing a memory embedded in the wind. As the transport vehicle crossed the state line into Minnesota, Coda suddenly stood up inside the crate. Not panicked, not aggressive, just alert. His body went rigid. His ears flattened slightly. His breathing changed. Brooks checked the monitors. "Hey, easy." Coda ignored him. He pressed his nose against the metal bars and let out a low, unfamiliar sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A whine. Soft, almost mournful. Brooks had heard that sound only once before, years ago, on a battlefield, when Coda had found a soldier buried under rubble, alive, but barely. Lucas stood in the execution waiting room the next morning. The room was small, dimly lit, colder than the rest of the facility. The walls were painted pale gray, the air thick with disinfectant. He wore the same gray jumpsuit. His wrists were bound. A chain ran from his cuffs to a steel ring bolted into the floor. He had imagined this room many times, had imagined fear, regret, panic. But what he felt instead was stillness, as if everything that could be taken from him already had been. The door opened. 2 guards entered. Behind them, Coda. For a moment, Lucas couldn't breathe. The dog looked older, thinner, but it was him. The same dark eyes, the same scar on the left ear from a training accident, the same presence that had once made the world feel manageable. "Coda," Lucas whispered. The dog froze. Their eyes met. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lucas expected Coda to run, to bark, to pull against the leash. But Coda didn't move. He stood perfectly, still, ears forward, tail low, eyes locked on Lucas with an intensity that made something twist painfully in Lucas's chest. Brooks tightened the leash. "It's okay, boy. That's him." Coda took 1 step forward, then stopped, and slowly. He growled, not loud, not aggressive, but deep, confused, uncertain, like he was seeing a ghost that didn't match his memory. Lucas's throat tightened. "Coda, it's me." The dog tilted his head and sniffed the air, long, carefully, as if reading something invisible around Lucas's body. Brooks frowned. "That's strange." Coda took another step, then another, not toward Lucas's face, but toward his left shoulder. And for the first time since the chains closed around his wrists, Lucas felt afraid, not of death, but of what his dog was about to remember. Morning arrived without apology, not with sunlight or birdsong, but with a thinner kind of silence. The storm had weakened, but the world outside the cabin still looked like a place that had been erased and rewritten overnight. Snow covered everything. The road, the trees, even Ethan's truck, now half buried like a fossil in white. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to quiet embers. The air smelled of ash and tea leaves and something human. Sleep, breath, survival. Ethan stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the forest slowly reappear from beneath the storm. Behind him, Eleanor slept on the couch, her silver hair spread across the pillow like frost. Shadow lay beside her, his body curved protectively around her legs, breathing slow, steady. Harold sat at the small wooden table reading from an old paperback Megan had left behind weeks ago, something about mountain weather patterns. His injured leg was wrapped and propped up, but his posture remained upright, disciplined, as if pain were an inconvenience rather than a condition. The sound of tires crunching snow broke the stillness. Shadow's ears lifted instantly, not aggressive, not alarmed, alert. A vehicle stopped outside. Ethan frowned. No one ever came up here unannounced. Then he recognized the engine. A Ranger truck. Green, heavy, government-issued. The door opened, boots on snow. Ethan's shoulders tightened. Shadow stood, walked to the door, and waited, tail low, posture neutral. Ethan opened it. The woman standing outside looked exactly like the forest itself. Tall, lean, early 40s. Brown hair tied back into a practical knot that had given up on being neat years ago. Her skin was weathered, pale but sunburned in places, the kind of face shaped by wind rather than mirrors. She wore a dark green ranger jacket with a silver badge on the chest. Megan Brooks, Forest Service. Her eyes were sharp gray, observant but not unkind. The kind of eyes that notice details because missing one could mean someone died. "Morning, Cole," she said. Ethan blinked. "You track people by license plate now?" Megan gave a half smile. "By tire tracks. Yours are terrible at hiding." She stepped inside, brushing snow off her boots. Shadow sniffed her once, then allowed her to pass. Eleanor stirred on the couch. "Who is it?" she murmured. Megan's gaze shifted to the couple for the first time. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "Well," Megan said slowly, "so you finally found him." Ethan felt something tighten behind his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Megan looked between him and the Whitmans, then sighed. "I was hoping you'd figure it out before I had to explain." Harold straightened. "Explain what, exactly?" Megan folded her arms, studying Ethan like a map she had learned long ago but never expected to use again. "You've had visitors asking about you for 2 weeks," she said. "Older couple, from Boston originally. They said they were looking for a former officer." Ethan's coffee went cold in his hand. Megan continued calmly. "They came to the ranger station 3 times, asked for your name, your location, your current status." Ethan stared at her. "And you didn't tell them?" Megan shook her head. "You don't like being found." Eleanor slowly sat up. Her face had gone pale again, but not from fear, from exposure. "We didn't want to ambush you," she said softly. "We just didn't know where else to go." Ethan looked at her, then at Harold, then back at Megan. "You're telling me this wasn't random," he said. Megan's voice was quiet. "No, Ethan, it wasn't." The cabin seemed to shrink again, not physically, existentially. Eleanor took a breath. "We were searching for our son's last commanding officer." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Eleanor's eyes met his. "Your name was in every report," she swallowed. "Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Harold spoke next, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "You were in charge of the Arctic unit Lucas served in." Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Shadow slowly sat beside him, not touching, just present. "That's impossible," Ethan said quietly. "Lucas Whitman died in a weather incident. Civilian research accident. That's what the report said." Eleanor's voice cracked. "That's what they told us." She looked down at her hands. "They didn't tell us who was with him when it happened." Ethan felt something shift in his memory. Files opening, names resurfacing, frozen images cracking. "I wasn't his commander," Ethan said. His voice was flat. "I was his extraction lead." Harold's eyes widened. "You were there?" Ethan closed his eyes. "Yes." Shadow suddenly stood up. Not toward the door, toward Ethan. He placed his head directly against Ethan's chest. Not Eleanor's, not Harold's. Ethan froze. Shadow had never done that before. Not like this. Not unprompted. The weight of the dog's skull against his sternum felt deliberate. Eleanor whispered, "That's what Atlas used to do when Lucas was lying." Ethan opened his eyes. Shadow's amber gaze was locked on him, waiting, not judging. Waiting. Ethan exhaled, a long, broken breath. "I was supposed to get him out," Ethan said. The words tasted like rust. He slipped into a crevasse during a whiteout. Ice shelf collapse. Weather too unstable for helicopter. My team reached him 8 minutes too late. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. He was alive when you found him? She whispered. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Harold's voice broke. Did he suffer? Ethan stared into the fire. No. He was calm. He asked about his dog first. Eleanor sobbed. He said Atlas would be waiting. Shadow shifted, pressing closer to Ethan now. I held him while the temperature dropped, Ethan continued. I kept talking so he wouldn't fall asleep. His jaw tightened. He told me to tell you he wasn't afraid. Silence swallowed the cabin, the kind that only comes after truth finally surfaces. Megan stood quietly near the door, eyes lowered. I told them you didn't want to be found, she said. I didn't know they were his parents. Ethan nodded slowly. You did the right thing. Harold looked at Ethan, not with anger, with something heavier. Then why were you hiding? He asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. I didn't want to become their ending, Ethan said. I didn't want to be the man who confirms what hope keeps alive. Eleanor wiped her tears, but we needed to know who he was with. She looked at Shadow. And, somehow, we found you anyway. Ethan let out a weak laugh. On the same road. Megan shook her head slowly. You realize how impossible that is? Eleanor smiled faintly. No, I think it's exactly possible. Shadow rested his head on Ethan's knee. The weight of him grounded something that had been drifting for years. Ethan looked down at the dog, then at the Whitmans. I didn't save you by accident, he said quietly. Harold nodded. And we didn't find you by chance. Outside, the snow continued falling, but now it felt different. Not like a threat, like a boundary closing, something ending, something beginning. Ethan had spent years believing he was invisible, but the truth had followed him across ice, across time, across grief, until it finally stood in his living room and asked to be acknowledged. And for the first time since Lucas died, Ethan realized he hadn't been hiding from the world. He had been waiting for it to catch up. The room felt different after the scar was discovered. Not louder, not more chaotic, quieter. As if everyone inside the execution wing had suddenly realized they were standing in the presence of something fragile, something that could collapse if spoken about too directly. Lucas sat on the edge of the medical bed, the fabric of his jumpsuit still lifted near his left shoulder. The air felt colder now, or maybe it was just his blood. He kept staring at the scar, a line carved into his body by a night he couldn't remember. A truth his mind had buried, but his skin had kept. Coda stood beside him, closer than before. Not pressing, not leaning, just near. The kind of nearness that said, I'm here if you fall. Sarah Whitman watched them from a few feet away. She had seen hundreds of suspects over the years. Liars, killers, innocent people who looked guilty, guilty people who looked innocent. But she had never seen this. A man discovering his own body had been lying to him, and a dog who seemed to remember what the man could not. Marcus, Sarah said quietly, you're sure this behavior is significant? Marcus Reed nodded slowly. He had moved closer to Coda now, crouching slightly, his weathered face focused on every twitch of the dog's ears, every shift of his posture. This isn't emotional confusion, Marcus said. This is pattern recognition. Lucas frowned. Pattern of what? Marcus hesitated. Of violence. Agent Evan Brooks had been standing near the far wall since the examination ended. He hadn't said much, just watched. Brooks was still young, late 20s at most. He had sharp features, clean-shaven jaw, and the kind of disciplined posture that came from growing up around authority. His uniform was immaculate, boots polished, sleeves perfectly pressed. He looked like someone who followed rules, and like someone who didn't expect to ever be questioned. Coda hadn't looked at him until now. The moment was subtle, almost invisible. Coda's ears shifted, not fully, just enough. Then his head turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Brooks. Watson noticed it immediately. "Coda," she murmured. The dog took one step forward, then stopped. His eyes were locked onto Brooks's chest. Not his face, not his hands, his scent. Brooks swallowed. "What's he doing?" he asked, forcing a light tone. "I didn't think I smelled that bad." Marcus's body tensed. "No," he said quietly. "That's not curiosity." Coda moved again, one step closer, then another, until he stood directly in front of Brooks. Brooks shifted his weight slightly. Coda lowered his head and sniffed. Once, twice, longer this time. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled back and turned around, went straight back to Lucas, and sniffed the scar. The room went silent. Coda returned to Brooks, sniffed again, then back to Lucas, again and again. Marcus stood up slowly. "That's it," he whispered. Sarah's heart began to race. "What?" she asked. "He's comparing," Marcus said. "He's not identifying a threat. He's matching a memory." Lucas looked between Brooks and Coda. "You're saying he recognizes the same scent on both of us?" Marcus nodded. "Not exactly. He recognizes a connection." Brooks laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous. Dogs can't—" Coda suddenly growled. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. A low vibration that sent a chill through the room. Brooks froze. Sarah raised a hand. "Brooks, stay where you are." Brooks turned to her. "Sarah, this is insane. He's a dog." Marcus stepped forward. "No," he said calmly. "He's a military K-9 trained in forensic tracking. He's doing exactly what he was trained to do." Coda sniffed Lucas again, then turned, stared at Brooks, and sat. Alert position, perfectly still. Sarah felt her pulse pounding in her ears. "Brooks," she said slowly, "where were you on the night of Lucas's mission?" Brooks blinked. "I told you. Base security, internal shift." Sarah held his gaze. "Which base?" Brooks hesitated. "Northfield." Sarah frowned. "That's not the deployment location in the report." Brooks swallowed. "I meant North Ridge. Sorry, long day." Marcus looked at Coda again. The dog hadn't moved. Still sitting, still alert, still staring. Sarah turned to Keller. "Run Brooks's GPS logs, now." Keller hesitated only a second before nodding. He stepped out of the room. Brooks's jaw tightened. "You're really going to interrogate me because a dog sat down?" Sarah replied quietly. "I'm going to interrogate you because the dog remembers something we don't." Brooks scoffed. "Memory? That animal wasn't even on the mission." Marcus shook his head. "He doesn't need to be. Trauma scents are powerful. They linger on. Clothing, equipment, even skin. Coda isn't reacting to you as a person." Brooks laughed again, louder this time. "Then what is he reacting to?" Marcus met his eyes. Residue. At that moment, Coda suddenly stood up, not from Brooks, but from Lucas. He walked in a slow circle around Lucas's body, sniffed the air, then moved back toward Brooks. And for the first time, Coda didn't stop at Brooks's chest. He lowered his nose and sniffed Brooks's sleeve, directly over the left forearm. Marcus inhaled sharply. That's where someone would hold a blade. Brooks's face drained of color. Keller returned 5 minutes later. His face had changed. He handed Sarah a tablet. Sarah scanned the screen. Her eyes widened. "Brooks," she said quietly. "Your GPS places you within 12 miles of the classified mission zone, at the exact time Lucas was injured." Brooks shook his head. "That's impossible. I was nowhere near." "And this," Sarah continued, swiping to the next file, "is a chemical scan from prison security." Brooks frowned. Sarah read aloud. "Unregistered military-grade gun oil on your jacket. Not standard issue." Marcus let out a slow breath. "Coda smells that oil," he said. "It's not common. Only used in special ops equipment." Brooks stepped back. "This is a setup," he said quickly. "Anyone could have planted that." Sarah's voice hardened. "Then explain why Coda is linking your scent to a wound Lucas doesn't even remember." Brooks opened his mouth. No words came out. Coda growled again. Lower, closer. Brooks's eyes flicked to the exit. Sarah noticed. "So you were there," she said softly. Brooks laughed once, a hollow sound. "You're trusting a dog over 5 years of evidence?" Sarah stepped closer. "No," she replied. "I'm trusting the one witness who was never allowed to testify." She turned to Keller. "Place Agent Brooks under temporary detainment." Brooks's eyes widened. "You can't—" Keller grabbed his arm. Brooks resisted instinctively, not violently, but enough. Coda barked once, sharp, final. Brooks froze, breathing hard. "You don't understand," Brooks whispered. "I didn't kill anyone." Sarah looked at him. "But you were there." Brooks's shoulders slumped. He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because Coda had already said it. Lucas watched the scene unfold like someone trapped inside a dream. Brooks being led away. Sarah issuing orders. Marcus crouching beside Coda, whispering calming words. And all Lucas could think was, I wasn't crazy. For 5 years he had lived inside doubt, inside fog, inside a story that said he was the monster. Now his own body and his dog were telling him something else. He had been hurt first. He had been attacked. And someone in this building had known. Lucas pressed his fingers gently against the scar again. This time the pain felt different. Not like a wound, like a door. Opening. Coda returned to Lucas and sat at his feet. Not alert, not investigating, just sitting, the way he used to sit after a successful mission, waiting for the next command. Lucas lowered his head slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. Coda looked up at him, and for the first time since their reunion, he wagged his tail. Just once. The interrogation room at North Ridge felt smaller than it should have. Not because of the walls, or the table, or the two-way mirror humming softly behind the glass, but because every word spoken inside it seemed to remove a layer of space from the world. Agent Evan Brooks sat with his wrists cuffed to the metal table. For the first time since Lucas had met him, Brooks looked different. Not sharp, not confident, not in control. His uniform had been replaced with a plain gray shirt. His sandy blonde hair was damp with sweat, strands falling loosely over his forehead. The clean lines of his face were now tense, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. Across from him sat Sarah Whitman. She hadn't changed her posture. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't accused him of anything yet. She simply waited. That, more than any threat, was what broke people. Marcus Reed stood quietly near the wall, arms folded, watching Brooks the way he used to watch untrained dogs during their first tracking drills. looking for the moment when instinct overpowered discipline. Lucas was not in the room. He had been placed in protective custody 2 corridors away. For now, this truth was too dangerous to let him hear directly. Sarah finally spoke. "Do you know why you're here, Brooks?" Brooks swallowed. "Because a dog pointed at me." Marcus didn't react. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You're here because your GPS puts you at the edge of a classified mission zone on the same night Lucas Hale was injured. Because chemical scans found unregistered military gun oil on your clothing. And because a trained K-9 linked your scent to a wound Lucas never knew he had." Brooks laughed once, a dry, brittle sound. "So what? You think I stabbed him?" Sarah didn't blink. "I think you were part of something that went very wrong." Silence stretched between them. Then Brooks exhaled, long, slow, like a man letting go of the last thread holding him upright. "You don't even know what you're asking," he said quietly. Sarah tilted her head. "Then tell me." Brooks looked up, and for the first time, his eyes didn't try to hide anything. "They weren't supposed to send Hale." Marcus frowned. "Who wasn't?" Brooks's voice dropped. "The network." Brooks began to speak, not quickly, not dramatically, like someone reading from a story he had tried very hard to forget. "There's an internal operation running inside Defense Logistics. Not officially, not on paper. Just a few connected units moving weapons that were never meant to exist." Sarah's expression hardened. "Black market military supply." Brooks nodded. "Off-the-books prototypes, experimental hardware, anything too dangerous to test publicly." Marcus shook his head slowly. "And Lucas?" Brooks closed his eyes. Hale wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't on the real list. Sarah leaned closer. "So why was he sent?" Brooks swallowed. "Because he noticed anomalies, missing crates, mismatched inventory logs. He filed a quiet internal report." Marcus muttered, "Jesus." Brooks continued. "They needed someone to neutralize the situation before he went public." Sarah's voice sharpened. "So you framed him?" Brooks shook his head quickly. "No, not at first. The plan was to discredit him, make him look unstable, question his memory." Marcus frowned. "Then what happened?" Brooks's hands trembled. "There was another agent, a senior one. He panicked." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Name?" Brooks hesitated. "Lieutenant Mark Halloway." Marcus inhaled sharply. "Halloway? That guy runs covert transport oversight." Brooks nodded. "He showed up at the drop site. Lucas arrived early. Coda detected movement. Everything spiraled." Sarah's voice dropped. "And the wound?" Brooks looked down. "Halloway stabbed him, not to kill him, just enough to take him out of the picture." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You let that happen?" Brooks whispered. "I didn't know what to do." Sarah pressed. "And the dead officer?" Brooks's shoulders slumped. "He tried to report us. Halloway shot him." Silence crashed into the room like a physical force. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "So Lucas was unconscious, bleeding, and you—" Brooks finished the sentence. "We staged the scene." Sarah's fingers curled slowly into a fist. "You drugged him?" "Yes." "You planted his fingerprints?" "Yes." "You used his weapon?" "Yes." Marcus spoke quietly. "And the dog?" Brooks looked up again. "Halloway wanted Coda eliminated." Marcus stiffened. "But I said no. The dog had a public record. Killing him would have raised questions." Sarah stared at Brooks. "So you let Lucas take the fall instead?" Brooks nodded weakly. He was perfect. Clean record, national hero. If he broke, no one would look deeper. Sarah leaned back in her chair. You needed a scapegoat, Brooks whispered, and the system gave us one. At that exact moment, 2 floors above the interrogation room, Coda suddenly stood up inside the temporary holding kennel. Not barking, not growling, just standing. Marcus's assistant, a short woman named Lydia Park, looked up from her clipboard. Lydia was in her early 30s, petite, with black hair cut into a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. She had been assigned to monitor Coda while the investigation continued. Coda? She murmured. The dog turned his head toward the wall. Not the door. Not the hallway. The wall. And for the first time since being brought into custody, Coda pressed his forehead gently against the cold concrete. Lydia felt a chill run through her. Marcus, she whispered into her radio. I think he remembers more than we do. Sarah stood. She walked slowly around the table, stopping behind Brooks. Who authorized this operation? She asked. Brooks's voice was barely audible. Higher up, Logistics Command, but Holloway ran the field. Sarah turned to Marcus. We need Holloway now. Marcus nodded. He won't come quietly. Sarah smirked faintly. Neither did Brooks. 2 hours later, Lucas was moved again, this time not into another cell, but into a guarded medical wing. 2 armed officers stood outside his door. Cameras monitored every angle. Lucas sat on the bed, staring at his hands. They felt lighter, not because the chains were gone. They weren't, but because something had shifted. Dr. Naomi Pierce entered quietly. Her expression was different than before, less clinical, more human. Lucas, she said softly, there's been a development. Lucas looked up. Am I still dying? Naomi hesitated. No. Lucas's breath caught. Then what am I? Naomi smiled faintly. You're a protected witness. Lucas laughed. A short, stunned sound. A witness to what? My own murder? Naomi's voice softened. To the truth. Sarah Whitman stood alone in her office that night. The walls were covered in digital maps, personnel trees, classified access chains. At the center of it all, Lieutenant Mark Holloway, tall, decorated, untouchable. She studied his file. 38 commendations, 0 disciplinary reports, deep ties to Logistics Command. The perfect soldier. The perfect shield, Sarah whispered to herself. They always hide behind heroes. Lucas was escorted to a secure room where Marcus Reed waited with Coda. The dog lifted his head immediately when Lucas entered. No alert, no investigation, just recognition. Coda walked over and sat directly in front of Lucas, placing his head gently against Lucas's knee. Lucas felt his throat tighten. They told me I'm not being executed, he whispered. Coda blinked slowly. Lucas smiled faintly. Guess you didn't let me disappear. Coda's tail tapped once against the floor. Marcus watched them, and for the first time since this case began, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope, not the kind that saves, the kind that exposes. The governor signed the document at midnight. Stay of execution, immediate effect. Lucas Hale was officially removed from death row, not exonerated, not forgiven, but no longer scheduled to die. He was transferred to federal protective custody under Internal Affairs Authority. Sarah read the confirmation on her phone, then whispered, "Now it gets dangerous. Because systems don't like to be exposed, and scapegoats who survive become evidence." Lucas lay awake that night, not dreaming, not shaking, just staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 5 years, the future existed again. But so did something else. The people who framed him were still out there. And now, they knew he hadn't stayed buried. The courtroom was silent when the judge finally spoke Lucas Hale's name. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear, the kind that comes from people realizing they have just witnessed something irreversible. Lucas stood at the center of the room, hands resting lightly on the edge of the wooden table, wearing a simple dark suit borrowed from federal storage. It didn't fit him perfectly. The shoulders were slightly too narrow, the sleeves a little short. But for the first time in 5 years, he was standing without chains. His hair had grown longer, falling naturally over his forehead. The beard was gone, shaved that morning by a nervous junior officer who kept apologizing. Lucas's face looked thinner than it used to, less muscle, more bone. But his eyes were different. They were clear. Sarah Whitman stood a few steps behind him. She wore a charcoal gray jacket, black boots, her auburn hair tied back in the same low ponytail she always wore when she needed to stay focused. But today, her posture was different. Her shoulders weren't tense anymore. Her jaw wasn't clenched. For the first time since she took the case, she allowed herself to believe the system had actually done something right. The judge cleared his throat. Based on newly uncovered evidence, witness testimony, forensic data, and internal military records, this court finds that the conviction of Lucas Hale was obtained through manipulation, obstruction, and falsified evidence. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The judge continued. Effective immediately. All charges against Lucas Hale are vacated. The defendant is hereby declared legally innocent. The words echoed. Legally innocent. Not suspected. Not under review. Not conditional. Innocent. Lucas closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no anger. Just weight leaving his body. 5 years of it. Then someone behind him let out a quiet sob. Sarah. Lucas turned slightly. She was smiling through tears she hadn't noticed falling. It's over, she whispered. Lucas shook his head gently. No, he said softly. It's finished. They offered him everything. A formal apology from the Department of Defense, a public statement from the governor. Financial compensation large enough to erase every debt he had ever known. They offered him a seat on a military ethics committee. They offered him interviews, a book deal, a documentary. They offered him a chance to return. Lucas declined all of it. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply said, I already gave that world everything it wanted from me. No one tried to stop him, because they could see it in his eyes. He wasn't running. He was leaving. 3 days later, Lucas stood on the edge of Silver Pine Lake. The cabin was small, built of dark wood and stone, tucked between tall pine trees that whispered constantly in the wind. Snow still covered the roof, though spring was trying to push through. The air smelled clean, wet, alive. The kind of place no one searched for heroes, only people who needed quiet. Lucas dropped his bag inside the doorway and stepped back out. Coda stood beside him. The German Shepherd had aged. His fur was lighter around the muzzle now, his movements slower, joints stiffer in the cold. But his eyes were the same, dark, steady, observant, always watching. Lucas crouched down and placed both hands on Coda's head. You okay with this place? He asked. Coda tilted his head, then sat. Lucas smiled faintly. I guess that's a yes. The first night was silent. No sirens, no radios, no metal doors. Lucas lay on the wooden floor near the fireplace, unable to sleep in the bed. His body still expected hard surfaces, expected to wake up with walls too close and lights too bright. Coda lay beside him, head resting on Lucas's chest. Their breathing slowly, synchronized. Lucas stared at the ceiling. For the first time since his arrest, there were no memories trying to force their way back. No nightmares, no shadows, just the sound of wind moving through trees and a heartbeat beneath his palm. Sometime near dawn, Lucas woke up suddenly, not from fear, not from pain, from the sensation of being watched. He opened his eyes. Coda was sitting upright beside him, not sleeping, not restless, just staring at the front door, completely still. Lucas whispered, "What is it, boy?" Coda didn't move. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply waited. Lucas followed his gaze. Nothing was there. Just the door, the forest, the pale blue light of early morning. Lucas felt a strange sensation pass through him. Not danger, not warning, recognition. As if Coda wasn't reacting to something arriving, but to something finally gone. Coda slowly turned back toward Lucas and lay down again, peacefully. The days became simple. Lucas learned how to wake up without alarms, how to make coffee without rushing, how to walk without checking his surroundings every 3 seconds. He fixed the broken dock, replaced the cabin's roof shingles, learned which birds visited the lake at sunset, and every morning he and Coda walked the same path around the water. Slowly, not training, not patrolling, just moving, together. Sometimes Lucas talked, not about the case, not about the prison, not about Holloway or Brooks or the system that had almost erased him. He talked about nothing, the weather, the smell of pine, the way the lake froze differently each night. Coda listened, as he always had. One afternoon, Sarah Whitman visited. She parked her car at the edge of the dirt road and stood there for a moment, unsure whether to walk closer or turn around. She looked different out here. No suit, no badge, just jeans, a thick jacket, hair loose around her shoulders. Less investigator, more human. Lucas saw her from the porch. He raised a hand. Sarah smiled and walked toward him. "Nice place," she said. "It's quiet," Lucas replied. Sarah glanced at Coda, who sat calmly at Lucas's side. "He looks older." "So do I," Lucas said. Sarah exhaled slowly. "I wanted to tell you. Holloway was officially arrested. Full charges: conspiracy, murder, obstruction, illegal weapons trafficking." Lucas nodded. "Good." Sarah studied his face. "You don't seem angry." Lucas thought for a moment. "I was," he said. "For a long time." "And now?" Lucas looked at Coda. "Now I'm tired." Sarah smiled sadly. "I think you earned that." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sarah asked quietly, "Do you ever think about going back?" Lucas shook his head. "No. The man they want me to be doesn't exist anymore." Sarah hesitated. "Then who does?" Lucas answered without thinking. "The man my dog recognizes." That night, Lucas wrote in a small notebook. He hadn't written anything personal in years. The first page was blank. The second had only one sentence. "The law forgot me. My dog didn't." He stared at the words for a long time, then closed the book. The world moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. New heroes replaced fallen ones. Lucas Hale slowly faded from headlines, then from memory, and he was grateful for it. He no longer needed to be remembered, only present. On the first warm morning of summer, Lucas and Coda stood on the dock, watching the sun rise over Silver Pine Lake. The water reflected the sky in soft gold. Lucas inhaled deeply. "For a long time," he said quietly, "I thought surviving was the same as living." Coda shifted closer to him. Lucas continued. But it's not. He placed his hand on Coda's back. Living is choosing where you stand after everything falls apart. Coda leaned into his leg. Lucas smiled. Guess I chose you. Coda's tail moved slowly against the wooden planks. Not excited, not playful, just steady, like a promise. Lucas never returned to the military, never wrote a book, never appeared on television. But sometimes, when the wind moved through the trees just right and the lake was completely still, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not justice, belonging. And that was enough. Because wherever he went now, Coda went with him. And for the first time in his life, that felt like freedom. This story is not really about a storm, a road, or even a rescue station. It is about what happens when human pain finally meets divine timing. Ethan believed winter was where people disappeared. But God showed him something different. Winter is where people are found. Sometimes God does not remove the storm. He places the right person inside it. Shadow did not just follow instinct. He followed a calling. And Ethan did not survive by accident. He survived because God still had work for his hands and his heart. The Whitmans lost their son, but God did not leave them alone in their grief. He led them step by step through snow, fear, and coincidence until they found the one man who could carry their story with truth. This is how miracles often work in real life. Not as loud signs from the sky, but as quiet meetings on the road we almost didn't stop on. In our own lives, we all have a winter road, a season of loss, a moment of loneliness, a place where we feel forgotten. And yet, God is still sending signals. Through people, through unexpected help, through small moments that remind us we are not alone. Sometimes you are the one being rescued. Sometimes you are the one sent to rescue others. But you are never invisible to God. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you of this. No pain is wasted. No meeting is random. And no life is beyond being used for something greater. Share this story with someone who feels lost. Leave a comment if you believe God still works through ordinary people. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories of hope, healing, and quiet miracles. And may God bless you, protect your journey, and turn every winter in your life into a signal that help is on the way.